Hi guys, welcome to Book Time. My name is Julia. Today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for Aussie April, which was the Readathon hosted by Jaclyn and All D Books. And so Jaclyn is an Australian YouTuber, but she lives in Texas. And as part of celebrating her 1 year anniversary on BookTube, those two decided to do the Aussie April Readathon to try and get people reading more Australian books. And I was sitting down and I thought, oh, I should go through all the Aussie April videos, but Jaclyn's made a playlist and there's like over 72 or something. Like, people have really got on board with it, which is awesome that people are reading Australian fiction. So I will try and look at them, but probably not all in one sitting. Anyway, I'm going to go through the books that I read. They're not exactly the ones that I had in my TBR, but they're pretty close. The first prompt for the readathon was a recent release that you have seen reviewed on BookTube, and for that I chose From the Wreck by Rawson. So this actually came out a few years ago in Australia, but it's a new release now in the UK, and it's been really popular particularly on BookTube because Simon Savage really loved it, and I think the UK edition even has like a little blurb or quote from him on it, which is absolutely awesome. It's so cool. And I'm so proud of Rawson because she's sort of published by Transit Lounge, which is a small independent press, but the book's just taken off. Anyway, I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. It was so good. It was such a joy to read, and it was so nice to have a book that every night I was so excited to go to bed to be able to have to read it. I haven't had a book that I was that excited to get to for a long time. So basically, I thought it was going to be historical fiction, and it sort of is a little bit. So it's set in the 1800s, based on a shipwreck that really did happen, and a guy called George Hills, who, as it turns out, is like the great-great-great-great-grandpa of Jane Rawson, or some relation anyway. And he's on this shipwreck, but it's also about this alien or being from another planet or dimension that somehow ends up on this shipwreck. And it's I don't want to give too much away because it's such a strange story, and every chapter I was like, this is so weird, like this is just going in a direction I did not see coming, but it sort of made perfect sense. Like, it never felt to me anyway unbelievable, or it worked within its own world, but it's so, even though it had this alien in it, was sort of about trauma, like the trauma for George of being on this shipwreck, and the alien kind of helps him survive, but then his trauma is all bound up in this alien, and then the alien is sort of lonely for her own people. So yeah, it's about connection and loneliness and grief and trauma, and I thought it was awesome. I really, really recommend it. I don't really know how to describe it apart from what I've said, except that was really good, and I'm really glad this readathon got me to finally get around to reading it. So the second prompt was, I think it was an author you've been meaning to get to for ages, and in my TBR I had Kim Scott's book Benang. I didn't start that one in the end because it's very long and quite dense, and I'm in late pregnancy and my brain is like not functioning well enough to be able to read very long, complex books at this second, and I really want to pay attention to that one. So I read Escape, quite different, Escape to the Moon Islands, Quest of the Sunfish #1 by Marty McConaughey. So this is a middle grade fiction novel that came out a few years ago, and I've been meaning to read it because it was shortlisted for the Readings Children's Prize at the time. And this was pretty fun. I liked it a lot. It's cool. It's set in the future, I guess. And it's not strictly set in Australia, but it could be, like, the place where it's set, the country and the city are all made up names, but it could, it could be Australia, because when the kids go on their sailing trip, they obviously end up in some giant set of islands, which to me reads like Indonesia, like a set of tropical islands. But it's all very fictional, like it's sort of fantasy as well. Anyway, it happens, it's sort of a post-climate change catastrophe. So there's been something called the flood, which basically floods the entire world, and society's sort of in disarray, and there are really strict class divides, and it's about some kids whose dad goes missing and they have to go and find him, and the government's involved, and it's to do with like some tech he has. Anyway, it's pretty cool. I liked it. I found it really fun. I think I would recommend this to kids. And yeah, it had endearing characters. And the only thing I would say was that sometimes the pacing was a bit slow, and so I've got the feeling like the author was too scared for bad things to happen to her characters. So not that bad things didn't happen or that they didn't sort of get into scrapes, but they got out of those situations pretty easily. I felt, and sometimes I feel that happens with kids fiction, whereas really I think kids can take it when stuff a bit more serious happens. But I still liked it. I'll still read the next two in the trilogy because I thought it was very fun. And I thought it also had some really good insights into class differences, because the two of the main kids are really poor, but they have a friend who's quite rich, and sort of the conversations they have I think would be a really great conversation starter with children about privilege and the different ways in which people live and expectations and things like that. So that I thought was particularly valuable. So yeah, I liked this one. I thought it was pretty good. So then there were two bonus prompts, and the two bonus prompts were a book by an Indigenous author. So I did read, well, I haven't quite finished, but I've almost finished Stan Grant's Talking to My Country. So originally I had this down for the prompt, an author you've wanted to get to for ages, because he is an author I've wanted to get to for ages. He's an Australian journalist. He's reported on stuff around the world. He worked for CNN for ages. He's had a pretty intense job, like reporting on a lot of war zones and stuff. He is also a Wiradjuri man, which is sort of an area in southern New South Wales. And this is kind of about, it's sort of like part memoir, personal essay. I wouldn't say it's a memoir because it's more like a personal essay and meditation on race and the way race works, but sort of told through his own perspective and with examples used from his own, not just his own life, but his own history. So like his ancestral history, which is half Wiradjuri, but also has white Irish convict ancestry in it. So it's really interesting. And the reason I haven't finished it yet is because it's not very long, and it's not, the writing style is not difficult to read, but I didn't want to read it too quickly because I feel like I want to digest it. And also a lot of the stuff in it is like obviously quite upsetting. He talks about different locations and like places that are meaningful to him, where his family was massacred, things like that, in the past. And he talks, about the gap between outcomes for Indigenous kids and non-Indigenous kids. So, it's pretty hard stuff. It's great though. I'm really enjoying it. Like I think it's a really important book, and hopefully I'll finish it really soon. Stan Grant is interesting. Like I've read a lot of his reportage, and he's often interviewed on news programs and stuff. He doesn't shy away from the hard stuff in history, but he's also, I feel like he's very generous and very optimistic about the future of race relations in Australia. I suppose like he's really optimistic, and I suppose you would say like politically more conservative than, he's not conservative, but he's maybe slightly more conservative than a lot of other activists. He's a really interesting guy, and I find it, but he's really optimistic about the future of Australia and, the directions we could go in and the potential. It's a good book. It's challenged me a lot, and hopefully I'll finish it soon. And the last one I got to, so the other prompt was a book that has been shortlisted or longlisted for the Stella Prize, at some point in time. So the Stella Prize is the Australian prize for women's writing. It doesn't have to be fiction. This book, which I read, Wintering by Krissy Kneen, has not been shortlisted or longlisted for the Stella Prize, but another novel that Krissy Kneen wrote called An Uncertain Grace was longlisted last year maybe, or the year before, or some point. So I thought that kind of counts. And I've wanted to get to her for ages. And it has a really pretty cover. This was cool. It's a novel. It's set in Tasmania, which is Australia's southernmost state. It's cold there. And it's set in the very south of the state where there are a lot of really old growth rainforests that are really beautiful, but very dark and muddy and wet and cold. And it's about a couple who live there, sort of about this woman and her partner goes missing. Basically, you don't know what happens to him, but essentially it's kind of this, it's almost got a mythical element to it where there's this idea that he's been taken by the Tasmanian tiger, which is an animal that's actually been declared extinct for a long time because it got hunted out when Tasmania was colonised. I'm not making much sense of this, but basically I think the implication is that her partner's abusive and that abusive men get taken by this Tasmanian tiger. I'm not spoiling it here. It's very strange. Yeah, so you don't know what happens. She doesn't know anyone in the community because basically her husband was very abusive and coercive and stopped her from making any friends. Well, that's the impression that you get. It's never sort of like super explicit, but it builds and builds and builds. Yeah, it was really good. She created a really menacing atmosphere, and her descriptions of the forests and the coast in southern Tasmania was spot on. Like, they were just right. The stuff I found, like, I think I gave this 3 stars on Goodreads. I actually really enjoyed reading it. Like, I couldn't put it down. I kept wanting to go back to it, keep reading. But there are a couple of things to do with the plot, like the main character and her partner's relationship was clearly highly problematic, but it didn't set up why she would have liked him or why he would have liked her. Like, I wasn't clear on what the attraction was in the first place. And so because I wasn't convinced of why she initially got together with him, like, obviously I understand that women stay in abusive relationships for a whole host of reasons. But yeah, the initial sort of attraction and love and stuff, I wasn't quite convinced on. And so it meant that when she was grieving his loss, I didn't feel it as keenly as maybe I could have had that earlier, like the earlier parts of their relationship maybe being better developed. But yeah, apart from that, and there are a couple of other things, like some of the stuff around the ending seemed a bit unnecessary or implausible. But that said, I still really enjoyed it, and her writing style was really, really great. So I definitely want to read her other novel, An Uncertain Grace, which was the shortlisted one, because a lot of people, since I mentioned this in an earlier video, have commented on how much they enjoyed the other one, An Uncertain Grace. So yeah, this is good. I do recommend it despite like a few sort of plot related flaws, I suppose. So that was that one. So that was my wrap up. I did finish a couple of other books during April, but they're not by Australians, so I'll probably mention them in another video. I had a really fun time doing this readathon. Okay, bye.